The night she couldn't breathe began the moment the wind shifted across the prairie, carrying with it the smell of rain-soaked dust and old grief, the kind that never really leaves a woman once it has settled into her bones. Eliza Hawthorne had learned to live with that kind of grief after her husband died beneath a sky just as merciless as this one, crushed beneath a spooked horse and the weight of promises that would never be kept. Widow. The word followed her everywhere, whispered by townsfolk, carved into their stares, stitched into the silence of her evenings. She stood on the porch of her weather-beaten homestead, fingers wrapped tight around the shawl at her throat, watching the horizon darken as if the land itself was holding its breath. That was when she saw him, a lone rider cutting through the tall grass like a shadow given form, broad shoulders hunched against the wind, hat pulled low, horse moving with the slow confidence of a man who knew where he was, going even if he wished he didn't. Caleb. Rourke had been gone for 7 years, long enough for rumors to grow teeth, long enough for his name to taste like regret in Eliza's mouth. He had been her husband's closest friend, the man who taught her how to shoot, how to ride hard, how to laugh again after sorrow tried to hollow her out. Then one night he vanished, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and a silence that hurt worse than any goodbye. Now here he was, dismounting in her yard as thunder rolled low and warning through the plains, his boots hitting the dirt like punctuation on a sentence she wasn't ready to finish. When he looked up at her, their eyes collided with a force that stole the air from her lungs, and she felt that old ache flare to life, sharp and unforgiving. He looked older, harder, scars cutting pale lines across sunburned skin. But the eyes were the same, dark, steady, carrying things he had never been able to say out loud. "Eliza," he said, her name rough on his tongue like it hurt to speak it. She didn't answer at first, because the sound of his voice cracked something open inside her, a place she had boarded up after the funeral, after the last casserole dish had been returned and the world had moved on without her. Rain began to fall, fat drops splashing against the porch boards, soaking his coat, matting his hair, and still he stood there as if daring her to send him away. She should have. God knew she should have. Instead, she descended the steps slowly, heart pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it, each step bringing memories rushing back, shared laughter, stolen glances, the way he always stood a little too close when her husband wasn't looking. The storm broke fully then, rain hammering down, thunder cracking so close it rattled the windows, and when she reached him, the world narrowed to the space between their bodies. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but there was no strength in it. He swallowed, jaw tightening. "I know," he replied, voice low, raw, "but there's nowhere else." "I can be!" Another thunderclap tore through the sky, and instinct overrode sense as she grabbed his sleeve and pulled him under the porch roof, her hand lingering longer than it should have, her breath coming too fast. The closeness was unbearable, the heat of him cutting through the chill, the familiar scent of leather, and rain wrapping around her like a memory she had no right to want. He stiffened, then slowly, carefully, he turned toward her, as if any sudden movement might shatter what little control he had left. "You look tired," he said quietly. She laughed once, sharp and humorless. "That's what surviving does to a person." Silence stretched, thick and heavy, until she felt like she might drown in it. Her chest tightened, breath catching, the weight of everything she had lost pressing down on her all at once. Caleb noticed immediately. He always had. "Eliza," he murmured, stepping closer without touching her, giving her the space to pull away even as his presence filled it. "Breathe." She tried. She failed. Her vision blurred, the storm outside echoing the storm inside. And before she could stop herself, she pressed a hand to her chest, panic clawing its way up her throat. That was when he broke. One moment he was holding himself back. The next he was there, hands firm but gentle at her arms, guiding her toward him, grounding her with the undeniable reality of his strength. "I've got you," he said, voice steady even as his eyes burned. "You're not alone, not now. Not anymore." She shivered. Not from the cold, but from the way those words sank deep, striking a place she had protected with everything she had. She could feel his breath against her hair, his heart pounding just as hard as hers. And when he drew her closer, slowly, respectfully, giving her every chance to say no, something inside her finally gave way. She leaned into him, forehead pressing against his chest, breath coming in shaky pulls as his arms closed around her, solid and sure, holding her as if she were something precious instead of broken. "I couldn't breathe," she whispered, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. Everything just collapsed. His hand slid up her back, warm through the wet fabric, anchoring her. "I know," he said softly. "I felt it too." The admission hit her harder than the thunder, because it meant he had carried this loss as well, had been punished by absence in ways she had never allowed herself to imagine. They stood like that while the storm raged, two wounded souls clinging to the only shelter left. And when she finally pulled back, her hands still fisted in his coat, she saw the same dangerous longing reflected in his eyes. It scared her. It thrilled her. It made her feel alive for the first time in years. "If you stay," she said carefully, "everything changes." He didn't hesitate. It already has. And as the rain continued to fall in the night, deepened around them, Eliza Hawthorne realized that some wounds don't heal quietly. Some connections don't fade no matter how much time passes. And some stories begin not with hope, but with the moment you finally let yourself be held. Morning did not arrive gently at the Hawthorne homestead. It crept in slow and pale, sliding through rain-streaked windows and settling over the house like a quiet witness to something that could no longer be undone. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a land rinsed raw and glistening. But inside Eliza the thunder still rolled, low and relentless, echoing in the hollow, places where grief and longing had tangled themselves together. She woke on the narrow bed in the guest room, the scent of damp wood and fading rain clinging to the air, her body still remembering the weight of Caleb's arms, the steady rise and fall of his chest against her forehead, the way he had held her without asking for more and somehow given her everything. For a moment she lay still, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the night had been a fevered dream born from loneliness and memory. But then she heard the muted creak of floorboards and the soft clink of metal from the kitchen, and reality settled in. He was still here. The realization tightened something sharp and sweet inside her. She dressed slowly, fingers trembling as she tied her hair back, every movement heavy with the knowledge that stepping out of that room meant stepping into a future that could not return to the careful, colorless safety she had built around herself. When she entered the kitchen, Caleb stood at the stove, sleeves rolled, dark hair still damp at the edges, the lines in his face softened by the morning light. He looked like a man who had been awake for hours wrestling with thoughts he couldn't tame. He turned when he heard her, and for a heartbeat neither of them spoke, the silence thick with everything unsaid. "Coffee's strong," he finally said. "Figured you'd need it." She nodded, settling into the chair across from him, their knees almost brushing under the small table, close enough to feel the warmth of each other without touching. Outside, a meadowlark called, bright and careless, and the sound felt almost cruel against the heaviness between them. "You didn't have to stay," she said quietly. He met her gaze, steady, unflinching. "You didn't ask me to leave." The truth of it hovered between them. She hadn't wanted to. The years unraveled then, spilling out in fragments. His leaving, the rumors, the fights he'd run from, the things he'd done in the Badlands just to stay alive, the way he'd heard about her husband's death and nearly broken, in half under the weight of it. "I thought if I came back," he admitted, voice rough, "I'd only tear open wounds. You'd finally closed." Eliza's laugh was soft and bitter. "They were never closed," she said. "Just buried." The words opened something dangerous. The sunlight climbed higher, dust motes drifting lazily, time pressing forward whether they were ready or not. She led him outside past the sagging fence, into the wet grass where the earth smelled clean and aching and alive. The land rolled wide and empty, the kind of emptiness that made feelings louder. "You're going to leave again," she said. Not accusing, just stating what felt inevitable. He shook his head. "Not if you tell me not to." Her chest tightened at that, the weight of choice settling heavy on her shoulders. For years she had been acted upon, widowed, pitied, endured. Now here stood a man giving her the reins, asking her to decide what kind of pain or hope she was willing to live with. The wind lifted her shawl, brushed his coat, and suddenly the space between them felt unbearable. "I was so tired of breathing alone," she whispered, "of waking up and remembering everything that's gone." He stepped closer, careful, reverent, as if she were something fragile and wild. "You don't have to anymore," he said. Her breath hitched, the same tightness returning. But this time it wasn't panic, it was fear of losing something she hadn't even fully claimed yet. When his hands came to her waist, slow and questioning, she didn't pull away. She rose onto her toes, forehead pressing into his shoulder, and he drew her close. Deeper this time, not just sheltering, but holding her like a man who had crossed deserts to get back to something sacred. The widow shivered, not from cold, but from the way he reached the deepest place in her, the place that had been starved of touch, of warmth, of being seen. "I couldn't breathe when you hit the deepest spot," she murmured against him, not meaning it the way it sounded, but meaning it in the way only two broken hearts could understand he had touched the deepest wound, and somehow made it hurt less. He held her tighter, jaw clenched, eyes closed. "I'm not here to ruin you," he said. "I'm here because you're the only place that ever felt like home." The words unraveled her. She clung to him, fingers digging into his coat, the land spinning slowly around them, grief and desire and fear braiding together into something fierce and trembling. Somewhere in the distance a horse snorted. A door creaked. Life continued in small, indifferent ways. But for them, the world had narrowed again to breath and heartbeat and the knowledge that staying meant risk and leaving meant another kind of death. She pulled back just enough to look at him, searching for lies, for hesitation, for the shadow of the man who once ran. She found only exhaustion and devotion and a quiet, dangerous hope. "If you stay," she said, echoing her words from the night before, "you stay for real, not for comfort, not for guilt." He nodded once. "For you," he said. The prairie stretched endless around them, a future unwritten, the storm washed clean from the sky. And in that wide, trembling silence, Eliza Hawthorne made a choice, not for the widow she had been, but for the woman who still wanted to feel alive. She rested her head against his, chest again, finally breathing without pain, finally allowing the closeness she had denied herself for too long, and the cowboy drew her close, not as something stolen or forbidden, but as something claimed by time, loss and the courage to stay. If this story tightened your chest, stirred your heart, and made you feel something real in a world full of noise, don't let the journey end here. Subscribe to the channel, stay with these characters, and step into the next story because the deepest emotions are the ones worth breathing for.